All good. Okay. Well, I think with that, let's get started. My name is Justin Banda. Welcome to Think Tank. This is our third Think Tank of this season. We're doing the third of four. So previously, we've done our series on homecoming, which Zach is going to explain in a minute here. But this is the third of four. The first one we did was based on education. The second think tank we did was focused on housing and housing stock. This think tank will be focused on transportation and municipal development. So we're very excited. We've got a stellar panel of speakers here today with us. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Leggett's own Zach Campbell. Zach is a member of our Quad City studio. He started working at Leggett in September of 2014, so he's been here much longer than even I have. Since then, he's worked on several projects ranging from education and government to corporate and transportation. Specific projects range from building envelope repairs and facility assessments to a 45,000 square foot performing arts center, addition and renovation, and the QC multimodal station. Zach has been a member of the City of Moline's Plan Commission since December 2020 and was the housing director of his fraternity's alumni board for 5 years, where he helped active members plan and coordinate renovations for their fraternity house. Zach earned his bachelor's and master's degree in architecture from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Zach, take it away.
Thank you, Justin. So we'll jump right into it. So why Think Tank? The Think Tank is an annual symposium that's put together by Leggett Architects. Each year, we invite authorities from a variety of disciplines to speak about trends related to their areas of expertise, as well as how design impacts those fields. In recent years, the symposium has featured discussions about biophilic and sustainable design, health and welfare, school safety, urban sprawl, and many other timely topics. This year, we are partnering with the Chicago Architecture Biennial and AIA Chicago. Today's conference will focus on answering the question, how can designers and urbanists reconnect disconnected communities to restore vital infrastructure? And what can we do to combat disinvestment? So, what is homecoming? Homecoming is the act of bringing the disinvested back to the table, with all the bittersweet realities that can entail. Reinvestment is the language of homecoming, not a physical return to a specific place, but a promise made by investors to communities and users that they matter, and that they are part of a legacy that will continue long after they're gone. I want to briefly acknowledge our partners and affiliates. Leggett Architects has generously sponsored the Think Tank since its inception, and we wouldn't be here today without their support. I also want to acknowledge the Chicago Architecture Biennial, now in its fourth iteration, and the second time the Biennial has partnered with us for our Think Tank program. Today, we will be hearing from our keynote speaker, Jeff Nelson, and that will last about an hour with a Q&A at the end. The first part is worth one AIA learning unit for those of you that are AIA members, and then the second half of our program today will be a panel discussion, and that will be worth 1.5 AIA learning units. So we'll dive right into our keynote speaker here. I'd like to introduce Jeff Nelson. Jeff began his career in public transit at the age of 22 when he became a transit planner at the Rock Island County Metropolitan Mass Transit District, also known as Metrolink. 3 years later, he was promoted to managing director and began transforming the organization into the award public transit agency it is today. During his 35 years as managing director, his strategic focus has been on implementing cutting-edge programs with an emphasis on economic growth, sustainability, technology, and workforce development. Recently, Jeff completed a highly anticipated multimodal development in downtown Moline, which will support passenger rail service from Chicago to Moline. Jeff facilitated the convergence of multiple private and public stakeholders to create a unique public-private partnership in support of a mixed-use, multimodal passenger rail station, which includes the Element Hotel, retail and restaurant space, and a passenger rail waiting area. Jeff has been actively involved in the American Public Transportation Association for 3 decades, serving in a number of leadership positions. Currently, he serves as chair of the APTA Board of Directors, a position he will hold through November of 2022. Jeff, welcome.
Well, thank you, Zach. And thank you for that very complimentary introduction. I'll try to live up to it.
Yes.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today at Leggett's Think Tank 2021 Homecoming Series. I've had a distinct pleasure of working directly with Leggett team in Moline and Zach, and I'm honored to be asked to share my thoughts today on the rapidly changing public transit landscape. I'm especially excited about the theme of this year's Think Tank, disinvested, disrupted, and design. We all know that COVID pandemic will have a long-lasting impact on every single aspect of our life. I can't think of a better term than disrupted to describe how our economy, society, and even personal lives have been impacted by the global pandemic. As CEO of Metrolink in Moline and chair of the American Public Transportation Association, I see every day how our public transit systems are coping with the setbacks brought on by the pandemic, on top of the infrastructure challenges and the racial inequities that exist long before the pandemic set in. The public transportation sector has a long history of delivering bold visions while addressing simultaneously changes. Urban designers, community leaders, and transportation officials have an incredible opportunity right now to think differently on how we deliver mobility to our communities. Public transportation will be one of those most important catalysts for building a vibrant, safe, equitable, flexible, and more accessible post-pandemic society. Today, I want to share with you how public transportation has responded to COVID pandemic, how we are reimagining public transit in the post-COVID world, and how new funding streams can help strengthen our transportation infrastructure. Finally, I'll share my experiences in working with a number of public and private stakeholders in the redevelopment of a historic warehouse in downtown Moline that Zach talked about. That combined hotel and retail and public space to prepare the future of passenger rail return to Chicago to Moline. But first, a little bit about Metrolink. We are the Illinois Quad City public transit provider, providing fixed route buses, ADA paratransit, microtransit, and passenger ferry boat service. When I started working with Metrolink back in the 80s, we were a Monday through Saturday fixed route bus system. Today, we've grown over the last 3 decades to be our community's mobility partner 7 days a week. You can't have a successful development or community without having quality, sustainable public transit, pedestrian, and bicycle infrastructure that connects residents to jobs, schools, and other critical services. That's been our mission, and we continue to work every day to provide safe and reliable mobility options to our community. For us, and for public transit agencies across the nation, the pandemic reinforced that a high number of essential workers are relying on public transportation to get them to their jobs. Let me share a couple of examples. Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority in Florida created a new program to get their essential workers to their place of employment. The program was for essential businesses whose employees rely on the bus, but because of the expanded hours of the business or less service hours on the PST buses, the employees no longer were able to get to or from work by riding the bus. PSTA is working to get these employees curb-to-curb rides to and from work by using rideshare programs such as Uber. In St. Louis, the CEO of Schnucks Grocery Store worked with the Transit Authority to provide gift cards to bus drivers as an incentive for drivers to come to work. He knew many of his essential workers could not get to work without public transit. Here in the Illinois Quad Cities, we expanded our microtransit service to provide rides to vaccination and testing clinics. Our microtransit service is an on-demand rideshare service that allows residents to book their trips via an app similar to Uber or Lyft. And in Monterey, California, the transit agency converted buses into mobile COVID testing facilities to get testing capabilities out to the agricultural workers out in the field. Keeping public transit systems running over the past 18 months could not have happened without the work of the American Public Transit Association, our members, and the riding public. Currently, I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the American Public Transportation Association. ACT is a nonprofit, international association of more than 1,500 public and private sector members. We represent all modes of transit in North America and advocate for federal funding on the Hill. During the pandemic, at.CDT secured almost $70 billion in COVID relief funding. This allowed public transit agencies to pivot and step up to meet the new needs brought on by the pandemic. The result of these innovations is a new level of respect and appreciation for the public among the transit users and non-users. Today, nearly 3 in 4 Americans consider public transportation to be essential service. That same proportion supports more investment to modernize and expand transit. And nearly 4 in 5 view public transit as the backbone of a multimodal transportation network. There is a growing belief that public transit has even a greater role in society to repair, strengthen, and grow the economy, to model sustainability, energy efficiency, and climate change solutions, and to advance the social politics that create greater access and equity for all, especially in underserved communities. As communities are looking to build back better and smarter, we need to take a hard look at what equity and access look like. 2020 has shown us how vital public transit is to the essential worker. Surveys conducted by my agency and other agencies across the nation show that 50 to 60% of riders using transit were using transit to their jobs. And those are all essential workers. They are the backbone of our economy, the retail workers, the healthcare workers, the manufacturing workers. Economic and public health data show that most essential workers live in historically underserved communities. Systematic racism and racial inequity is starkly visible in our transportation infrastructure when highways have been favored over transit lines and when communities underserved by transit are also the communities of most in need of affordable transportation. Households in low-income areas typically experience longer commute times and higher transportation costs. If they are depending on public transportation and can't get to work reliably, not only does that city suffer, but those workers suffer too. Grassroots efforts like the ones happening in my community involving engaging underserved populations and having one-on-one conversations about mobility. These conversations are crucial in helping us understand our community's needs and how we can do better. Redesigning our service with a focus on equity could mean shifting a higher level of service where maybe traditional bus or emergency microtransit service might be in the most need. Using mapping and data tools, we can identify neighborhoods with a high population of essential jobs and create better mobility options to shorten commute times and provide a higher level of service for our most vulnerable parts of our community. Here in my agency, we are using transportation software to unpack data related to population, commute times, food and job availability, and access to health and wellness services. Once we've identified those transportation gaps, we can align our routes to provide our communities with more reliable service. Powerful software tools such as these can optimize city planning and provide actionable insights where transportation equities truly lie. In San Francisco, the Equity Toolkit uses transit service data from 6 regional transit agencies to detect gaps that it could not before make better decisions for future Muni service. They have prioritized services for high ridership Muni routes, transportation-dependent populations, and connections to essential jobs and services. Over the course of the first 6 months of the pandemic, equity areas outperformed and performed better than the more affluent areas in terms of access to jobs via transit. This was the result of a deliberate planning work to ensure that residents living in equity areas have consistent and improved access to jobs and other crucial resources. The Portland, Oregon Bureau of Transportation uses an equity matrix to measure all transportation programs and projects to help achieve their citywide racial equity goals and strategies. Using race, income, and limited English proficiency, the matrix allows Portland to prioritize action in areas or with residents that fall below the citywide average for those demographic variables. Through this matrix, Portland's pricing options for equitable mobility project was born, which addresses the use of pricing strategies to create more equitable and sustainable transportation systems. The task force took a holistic approach to transportation. That task force recommends solutions such as providing flexible programs requiring employees to offer public transit benefits and encourage city planners to invest in public transit infrastructure, operations, and service. The framework priorities are reducing disparities and improving safety for people of color, people with disabilities, low incomes, and displaced communities. Other agencies across the country are implementing similar equity tools. They are examining how transit decisions impact other issues, such as housing prices and the displacement of low-income populations, along with easy access to jobs. Communities must be strategic in how they deliver the best mobility options to those who rely on the network, and how they prioritize transit resources for the most vulnerable communities. If we get this right, we will invest in a robust transportation network for those who need it most. This can have a profound impact on our economy and recovery. We must continue to support investment in low-income communities by partnering with our education and business communities to plan capital projects that create jobs and training opportunities in affordable housing. Studies have shown time and time again that investment in transit pays back 5 times over. These type of projects have the potential to increase employment opportunities and broaden overall economic activity, specifically in underserved communities. But we can't do it without funding. America's infrastructure is aging and crumbling. The American Society of Civil Engineers 2021 report card for America's infrastructure graded public transit with a dismal D-. Why? 45% of Americans have no access to transit. Currently, there is a $176 billion transit backlog, a deficit that is expected to grow to more than $270 billion through 2029. The challenges we face with aging infrastructure directly impact our ability to build back better and design transit services with equity in mind. Throw in a worldwide pandemic, transportation challenges compound. In Washington, this October has been full of uncertainty. Competing interests between and even within our own political parties are complicating congressional efforts. Efforts to raise the debt ceiling to finance U.S. government spending, pass the bipartisan $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the largest in American history, which includes a new multi-year surface transportation authorization to replace expiring FAST Act, and to reach agreement on the Biden administration Build Back Better proposal to create jobs and lower costs for working Americans, the most ambitious federal agenda in generations. And here in Illinois, our long-awaited capital funding through Rebuild Illinois is helping tackle the infrastructure projects head on. What does all this mean for our nation's public transit systems? Despite these challenges, there's good reason for optimism. First, Congress did extend the FAST Act until December. This signals a desire to finish that outstanding work on infrastructure, a new surface transportation law, and some form of the Build Back Better package before November. Second, public transportation has a compelling story to tell. We are using every opportunity to show Congress and the administration that transit is successfully delivering essential public services and providing a lifeline to communities during the pandemic. Last week, APTA testified before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on how we're using the nearly $70 billion in COVID relief money. The assistance is being used to maintain operations, avoid layoffs, implement health and safety protocols, deliver medicines and meals to at-risk communities, and offer free rides to vaccination sites while innovating and positioning the industry for the post-pandemic environment. And third, new priorities that will shape our future: climate change, racial and economic equity, economic recovery and growth, and greater access to mobility options require transit and community leaders to come together. The pandemic exposed some long-term national needs and accelerated the national desire for action. Transit is the essential element for progress on all these issues. Take a look at climate change efforts. The share of hybrid electric buses has doubled over the last 10 years from 7% to nearly 19% of the fleet. This shift is reducing greenhouse gas emissions and saving the equivalent of 6 billion gallons of gasoline a year. The confluence of climate change awareness, advances in technology, economic efficiency, and cleaner air during the pandemic are driving us towards electrification and low emission equipment faster than anyone predicted. Here we have a competitive advantage. Public transportation is far ahead of the private cars in this area, even though Tesla and others have often made the headlines. Transit systems, large and small, are investing in sustainable infrastructure in vehicles, maintenance, battery charging platforms, and hybrid fueling stations. It's good business. And what more and more the residents are looking for when choosing mobility options. Here at Metrolink, We unveiled our first battery electric vehicle in 2018, and by next year, our fleet will be 30% battery electric. As technology advancements occur and battery storage capacity increases, the buses will be able to run 9 to 11 hours between charge cycles. In addition, Metrolink is proposing infrastructure investment in the downtown terminals, including Center Station, which will allow our buses to receive an automated top-off charge every 5 to 7 minutes each time they arrive at the terminal. This extra charge capacity is expected to allow buses to operate a full day without needing to return to the garage for additional charge needs. While the electrical infrastructure is upgraded at the downtown terminals, Metrolink is also looking to include charging stations for personal automobiles and how to integrate them at major destinations and hotel facilities throughout the downtown. As a community partner, we hope this will encourage travelers to stop and enjoy downtown as electric cars become more prevalent in our industry. When we look at public transportation's impact on the economic development, we know that research that 87% of the trips on public transit directly benefit the local economy by connecting people to jobs, shopping, and spending on healthcare and entertainment. Time and time again, studies show that investing in public transit can offer an economic return to communities up to a 5-to-1 economic return. Let's take a look at how the city of Moline leveraged public transit funds to redevelop their downtown. The city of Moline is located in the heart of the Midwest, nestled between the banks of the Mississippi and the Rock River. Moline is the 9th populated city in Illinois, outside the Chicago metro area. One of the Quad Cities along with East Moline, Rock Island, Illinois, and Davenport, Bend, North Iowa. Together, we have a metropolitan area of more than 380,000 people. Center Station is a significant transfer center for Metrolink's fixed route system. It opened in 1998 and is an integral piece of Moline's Giant Air Commons development. The facility provides multimodal connections to pedestrians, bicycles, intercity bus, and passenger ferry boat modes of transportation, and will soon integrate the passenger rail service to Chicago. The development of Center Station enhanced transit access, provided multimodal connections, and incorporated transit into an urban renewal planning initiative in downtown Moline. This true transit-oriented development on the Giant Air Commons also includes agricultural exhibit known as the Giant Air Pavilion, the Tax Slayer Arena and Conference Center, the Radisson Hotel, and various other commercial and restaurant tenants. The mixed-use Center Station building features a customer service area, shared office space, office for 2 county sheriff's deputies, and a community banquet room and parking structure in the upper levels. This $8.1 million project was jointly funded by Metrolink and the City of Moline. Metrolink's partnership with the City of Moline to develop Center Station has since spurred neighboring communities to embrace transit-oriented development projects within the Illinois Quad Cities. For over 20 years, the Quad Cities has envisioned a planned and built for a return to Quad Cities, a Chicago passenger rail route. Civic leaders, Fortune 500 companies, and the economic development professionals have advocated for the return of passenger rail because of the vast economic benefit it will create in our community. Originating in Chicago Spur, the train is anticipated to greatly enhance regional access and grow commerce and recreational opportunities for students, tourists, business travelers, and residents between Chicago and Moline. After careful consideration, it was decided the station serving the Quad Cities metro area would be located in downtown Moline, home to the international headquarters of Global Giant Air Company and colleges and universities. This decision allowed the City of Moline to achieve its 20-year goal of having a true intermodal station within its downtown. After numerous studies were conducted, planning documents created, funding seeds planted with elected officials, and overwhelming community support garnered, the return of passenger rail became reality with the passage of nearly simultaneous federal and state funding packages in support of passenger rail. In 2010, a $230 million high-speed intercity passenger rail grant was awarded to Illinois and Iowa Department of Transportation to reestablish passenger rail service between Chicago and the Quad Cities. During that same year, the City of Moline submitted a Tiger II capital grant application and received $10 million in federal assistance to construct a mixed-use, public-private multimodal station to serve the passenger rail service and enhance the intermodal connectivity in the Quad Cities. In addition to the federal grant, the City of Moline also received an Illinois Capital Assistance Grant in an amount of $4.9 million. Ultimately, Metrolink ended up administering the grant on behalf of the city. The city of Moline and Metrolink did not envision the station to be a standalone project with church pews and a Coke machine in the back, but rather a part of a mixed-use, transit-oriented development that would bring additional amenities to residents and tourists in Moline, as well as additional revenue for the city. Most cities build a train station. Moline chose to invest in a larger economic development piece. Moline thought bigger and broader and developed a true multimodal footprint in the downtown. With the Tiger II grant in hand, Moline and Metrolink began their quest in developing the project that is now known as the Q Multimodal Station. The site selected for the multimodal station is located at 4th Avenue and 12th Street in downtown Moline and offered an extraordinary transportation-oriented development opportunity to build off a vibrant physical, geographic, demographic, and economic base and added a unique character to Moline and the Quad Cities. The project site is located in the heart of downtown Moline, directly adjacent to the John Deere Commons development. This site lays just a quarter-mile from the mighty Mississippi River, with connections to the bike trails and the Channel Cap passenger ferry boat system. In addition, over 2,000 employees are within walking distance from the site, and the Rock Island Arsenal's 6,000 civilian employees are located within a mile of this site. In 2010, the two entities contracted with Green Enterprises for Neighborhood Capital Institute of Chicago to conduct a market assessment and develop a development guide to assist the entities in making the site proposed developers. And in early 2013, the city of Moline identified the Mean Group as a private developer for this project. But we also needed an architect and a project manager to lead this complex public-private historic development. Leggett was chosen from a highly competitive and skilled group of proposers. Your Work building is a 6-story historic structure located in downtown Moline that was constructed in 1917 for the use of a Sears warehouse. The Q Station occupies the first floor of the Work building and incorporates sustainable design standards and a unique mix of public and private development. Station-related improvements in the building include interior, common space, waiting areas for rail passengers, real-time and next train information signage, restrooms, and ticketing kiosks. Exterior improvements and new construction include a passenger rail platform for the systems, a kiss and ride lot, pickup and drop off areas, a grand passenger hall with connections to both the O'Rourke building and the rail platform, a pedestrian plaza capable of hosting a range of community events, rail passenger parking, and a pedestrian skywalk to Metrolink Center Station to promote intermodal access. The Q completes the vision of using Metrolink's existing center station to incorporate all modes of transportation: buses, personal vehicles, bicycles, passenger trains, taxis, passenger ferry boats, pedestrian traffic, and connections to the nearby Quad City Airport into one centralized location in the Quad Cities. The private development consists of an extended stay hotel with retail and restaurant space. A Westin brand, the Element Hotel, offers 75 extended suites and 21 standard rooms. In addition to the hotel building build-out in the original building, a new 3 to 4 story addition was constructed on the building's east wing to accommodate the additional rooms. The entire project, hotel, station, and retail space, pays homage to the history of the building with original floors, pillars, and red brick walls retained throughout the development. The public-private project faced many challenges due to the uniqueness of the multiple funding partners and the use of historic tax credits. Stakeholders for this project include the City of Moline, Metrolink, the Mean Group, USDOT, Federal Transit Administration, and the Federal Railroad Administration, Illinois Department of Transportation, US EPA, US HUD, and Renew Moline. In addition, the developer's design construction was completed in parallel with the Tiger design construction. The process of delineating public-private costs was a time-consuming and challenge. Tiger grant modifications required FTA headquarter approval and were not as flexible as the other FTA grant programs. The city and Metrolink had to rely on stakeholders such as IDOT, railroads, and developers when trying to adhere to the Tiger grant schedule milestones. The entire project was required to meet tax requirements, historic tax requirements, and approval by the National Park Service, resulting in additional submittals and formal amendments regarding the historic-related design changes. The state of Illinois fiscal challenges imposed additional burdens as delays in state funding were forced the City of Moline and Metrolink to provide gap funding during the period when the state lacked a budget. Parallel construction schedules led to two primes contractors working on the site at the same time. This led to additional challenges when change orders and field issues were identified. Critical path items for each contractor often relied on contractor schedule. Throughout the commitment and perseverance, the project progressed, and from the time the Tiger Grant was awarded in 2011 to the time the building officially opened was a period of 7 years. The station was completed and opened in late 2017, and the hotel opened for guests in February of 2018. The first retail tenant, Urban Farmhouse, opened in November 2018, and the skywalk between Center Station and Q was completed in 2020. Although there are currently no trains running between the Quad Cities and Chicago, the building is active and alive in hotel guests and shoppers. The City of Moline and Metrolink took advantage of a unique opportunity to incorporate a passenger rail station into a much larger and dynamic project, satisfying their vision for the multimodal station. The state of Illinois and its new administration has committed to implementing the passenger rail to the Quad Cities and Chicago, and work continues on track improvements. When the first train rolls into the station, Moline will be ready. This is one example of how successful private-public developments can work to provide better transit access and economic development returns in the community. As we look to the future of public transit, I see throughout the country how transit agencies are reinventing public transportation. As I've already mentioned, these initiatives include redesigning routes and schedules to better serve riders who mostly rely on us, filling service gaps, combining microtransit and paratransit, adding social workers to assist the homeless, and carry students to school, work, and critical frontline jobs. There is also an increasing focus on connecting mobility choices for more efficient, flexible, and convenient travel options. There are many examples throughout our country that are focusing on placemaking, urban design, and mobility hubs. In Minnesota, Metro Transit plans to expand a pilot that proves all-you-can-ride passes to residents of apartments, condos, and multi-unit buildings within their rent area. This fall, the agency will work with 20 property owners to offer the passes and will look to offer a program more widely in 2022. In Indianapolis, a new zoning ordinance supporting transit-oriented development will improve walkability, housing diversity, and connections along their new BRT lines. The city of Nashville has established a new Department of Transportation and multimodal infrastructure to prioritize safety and equity, deliver better bus service, and build more sidewalks, bikeways, and greenways. And in Buffalo, a major city zoning change and extensive community engagement has resulted in an under-constructed affordable housing development to be anchored by a multimodal hub to encourage people to walk, bike, take public transportation, car share, or any other form of eco-friendly transportation. We also need to invest in technology that makes using transit more convenient, reliable, flexible, and connected to other mobility providers. During the next year, I predict we'll see some emerging trends on how and when people prefer to travel and how they choose a particular service. As Yogi Berra said, you can see a lot by looking. We better be looking closely at these new travel patterns. Instead of the 2 daily 1 hour or one-way rush hour, transit agencies maybe need to organize or reorganize the resources around several busy times and locations every day, or for special events sponsored by retailers and entertainers, or for new passenger perks and amenities. Soon it will become commonplace in every community to request a rideshare transit van, to purchase trips on a multimodal with a one click of a mobile phone, or to select the best mix of mobility options, be it a private car, scooter, train, bicycle, or bus, based on time, ease of use, costs, and crowds. Think digital. That's how customers will get to their information, make their choices, pay for their access, and evaluate their customer experience. The bottom line is the old normal isn't coming back. We need to adapt to new and different normal. Adapting and embracing endless change may be the most important lesson from COVID. In times of uncertainty, survival often depends on one's ability to process new information, to think differently, and to be flexible, bold, and courageous. I'm proud to be part of an industry that has demonstrated a willingness to explore microtransit and on-demand services, congestion pricing like in New York and Los Angeles, and no fare transit services where it can be successful. New partnerships with rideshare, bike share, and other transportation services provide that connect people to transit. Innovations in onboard security cameras, operator training, and transit policing practices, and local government policies on who owns the curb and the road that can make transit more efficient and desirable. The elements that encourage and support evolution are many. Government policies that fund new ideas, partnerships with people and organizations beyond the transportation community so that we are always among the first to see what's coming next before others. Fostering a culture within our community that values and rewards innovation, open discussion, and challenging the status quo, and leveraging new technologies that allow us to lead rather than play catch up. This last point is especially critical because of so many advances we've made in public transportation and society have been a result of technology breakthroughs. Staying technology aware may be public transit's biggest challenge for the future. It can make whole industries obsolete or create new ones in a blink of an eye. With all the uncertainty that surrounds us, with all the challenges known and unknown we must meet, I believe there is reason to be optimistic. After all we've endured, it's time to get back on track and invest in ourselves. The history of America is the story of moving people and goods. Transportation has reinvented itself with every new chapter of change. From technology we use to the benefits we provide to the people and communities we've been called upon to serve as our nation grows. Stores and malls are diversifying to incorporate offices, residential space by adding community college classrooms, and by creating shopping experiences that are entertaining, fun, and in ways that online purchases never will be. Employers will always need a home base, no matter how virtual they become. There is yet to be a true substitute for that face-to-face networking. Humans are social creatures. We need to gather at regular intervals to rejuvenate, to restore, to refresh, and to reaffirm our commitment to each other. There is nothing more fundamental to the human spirit than the need to be mobile. It is a force that sparks our imagination and opens pathways to life-changing opportunities. Mobility propels a promise of prosperity, of progress, and personal freedom. Only public transit can move large number of people as efficiently, as safely, and as cleanly and environmentally sustainable and conveniently. That's our huge advantage, and it needs to be leveraged by reinvesting the traditional rush hour and become a series of daily, flexible, high-energy capacity times, making transit fun, enjoyable, and experience to desire, and introducing convenience that make go-to mode of choice rather than a last choice option. Contributing in significant ways to social needs and social solutions for affordable housing, equitable development, access to opportunities, and the environment. In wholly new ways, we must show opinion leaders and the public how we are using historic levels of funding we have fought for and won to create a smarter, fairer, more efficient, sustainable, and future-oriented transit. I've been in the business for 3 decades, and I know this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reinvent public transportation in America. From those whom much has been given, much is expected. This is our time to come together to prove that transit needs to be, what it can be, and how critical it is for our nation's future. Thank you for your time today. I truly look forward to the conversations that will ensue from this. Public transportation is here. Public transportation is a part of our infrastructure, and we want to make it a fabric of our community. So thanks again for the time.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Great presentation. It looks like we have a number of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. The first question we have here is from Robin Randall. What role does bike infrastructure play in the development of a sustainable public transit network?
I think it's huge. And uniquely at Metrolink, we added bike racks to our buses almost 15, 18 years ago. We originally put those bike racks on thinking it would be a seasonal thing, but we found bikes are used year-round throughout the year. And our numbers of bicycles that continue to grow, so we've expanded the number of bikes we can carry. So we've shifted from a 2 to a 4 bike connection. I truly believe that first and last mile piece of public transit is a great option to use the bicycle, and I think we'll continue to see that grow.
Awesome. Thank you. Next one here. The Pentagon issued a report this week warning that climate change poses a widening threat to national security. What role do public transportation systems play in offsetting our carbon footprint?
I think I talked a little bit about that, about the whole battery electric. And I think as you see transit evolve into that sustainable footprint in a community, it plays a much greater role. And as we try to reduce that, we started 20 years ago. We moved into the compressed natural gas vehicles and have grown from that compressed natural gas into the battery electric. And I see that growth continue. And as you remember, transit is truly that footprint change for sustainability. We got 40 seats on there versus one for the car. So as you really look at the impact of public transit in a community, it can be pretty significant. And uniquely, when we brought on the natural gas buses and later the battery electrics, that's really the first time I'd ever got a call from the community thanking us for making that choice. So I think the community is greatly aware of that efficiency and, more importantly, the ecology element of public transit. And I think it's being recognized because we do have people making that choice every day on how to make that commute.
And there was a follow-up question with that as well. I think you kind of already hit on this one too. What can transportation systems do to offset or minimize their carbon footprint? I think you kind of hit on that with the compressed natural gas vehicles and the electric vehicles. And
well, we can also do it through construction means. So we built a new transit maintenance facility about 5 years ago. And if you really look at that footprint, we put a photovoltaic system on the roof that now charges those battery electric buses. We build in berms to move the stormwater into retention areas. We don't even have drains in our parking lot. We brought a variable flow energy system into heating and cooling of the building. We put a skylight in our maintenance area to bring natural light in to provide a higher quality of work conditions for the employees, but also that natural light to help them work through the day. So there's a variety of things you can do, not only just in that transit footprint, but also in your construction. And even when we look at flipping our historic building into a new building, Lady did an excellent job of really giving us some of those energy efficient options to build in the heating and cooling systems.
Definitely, yep. Next question. Much ink has been spilled about the disruption that private businesses like ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft have had on municipal transportation networks. Are these services ultimately helpful or harmful for growing an equitable transit system? And what places do these private services have in public systems?
That's a great question, Zach, and I'll answer that simply yes and yes. So with the rollout of Lyft and Ubers, what we also saw was uniquely an investment in transportation that didn't exist. So we now have in our palm of our hand our entire transit system. You can see in real time where that bus is, and you can then plan your trip on Google or Apple. And I think what that did was push investment into transportation that wasn't there. They're very complementary. And I think one of the key things that people really didn't necessarily look at is when you looked at Uber and Lyft, they had unlimited amount of money flowing in to support those two systems. They allowed people to make more conscious choices on how they get around, not using their own private vehicle. So with that, though, I think what was also missed was the cost per trip. So people always suggest that transit's highly subsidized. The Uber and Lyft trips are subsidized substantially more. So when you look at Uber and Lyft trying to make a living of it, it's more and more challenged. And I think through the pandemic, you saw a reset. So if you grab a Uber or Lyft now, that price is much different today than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But with that said, we also, as I said, Florida has looked at incorporating Lyft and Uber into some of those late night trips. We too have been working with Uber and Lyft to try to augment some of those late night trips to get those essential workers home. And I think partnerships are what you're going to see in the future. And I truly think both Lyft and Uber and maybe others will be a key part of our public transportation in most communities.
And kind of following up on that, what do you see with like the bike system, like the rentable bikes or like the scooters? Is it kind of the same ordeal there too?
I don't know if you've been to the cities that have the scooters already. That's obviously evolving. Washington, D.C. is one that I see on a regular basis. And scooters are good. Bikes are good. I think the whole mobility, especially for a younger population, they are looking for those alternatives. Safety factor side, we do need to be conscious on that, who owns that curb. And I made a point of that. And I think if we're truly looking at ways to create safe environments, we have to acknowledge those with wheels need to be in one place, those on feet need to be in a second. So trying to mix pedestrian, scooter, and bicycle is not probably the most efficient or safe way to do that. Looking at that whole mobility in a downtown and really who manages and owns those curbs, I think will be the fad of the future. And I truly think scooters and bikes are here to stay.
Okay. The next question for you, the development of macro level transportation systems like Amtrak, Metro, or PATH is what most people focus on when they think of mass transit, but it's the availability of more micro level systems like New York's Metro or Chicago's L that really impacts a consumer's decision to make public transportation. What considerations are given to developing these micro level systems alongside their more famous regional siblings?
I think, and that is a great question, because you have to look at, I'll call it the legacy cities on the East Coast versus, I'll call it our new cities, the Dallases, Phoenixes, and LAs, Seattle. So the legacy systems in New York's have had transit forever. Turn of the century type systems that were built around those systems, and how you successfully navigate those cities is crucial to be public transit. And the Dallases and Phoenixes and LAs and Seattles have all passed multi-billion-dollar initiatives to bring that same rail infrastructure in other communities. Obviously, bringing it in after the fact is much more expensive than bringing it in before the fact. But I think you see all cities growing towards that whole mobility snapshot. And I think when you really look at the density of development, rail is probably one of those first choices. Cities as small as Minneapolis and St. Louis have integrated those into their systems. Nashville has been working with commuter rail into the city. So I think as you see those medium-sized cities now starting to pursue some similar pieces, I think Kansas City has rolled out their downtown connection that's going to be built into tying into BRT. So I think you'll see small and medium-sized cities start to replicate this, probably more on a rubber tire format. But I think BRT is going to be one of the new pieces that will be growing into the smaller and medium-sized communities to really kind of replicate that on a smaller footprint.
Thank you. Next question for you. How do we advocate for protected bicycle networks in our cities in order to make bike transit safer and more attractive to potential users?
And I touched on that a little bit on who owns the curb. And I think really we see two distinct parallels on that whole bicycle network. There are going to be roadways that we can make that exclusive footprint in there. Here in the Quad Cities, we actually have, off-street paths and connections. But I think ultimately there has to be a realization in the general public, driving public, that bikes are going to be part of that transportation network. And I think we can do a better job of designing our intersections to make that biking safer. I think we need to redesign our interchanges or intersections just to make that pedestrian much safer. So I think the challenges we have right now is that distracted driving has really made walking and biking more challenged. And I am in both of those arenas, and you just got to really be cognizant of your surroundings and assume nobody is paying attention. But I think ultimately that's going to be one of our challenges, that we look back to people like you, Zach, to help us try to create that footprint in our downtowns, and more importantly, in our main corridors to connect our cities together. And I think as we collectively look at that curve, how can we make that more efficient, more usable and safe for all modes of transportation?
Definitely. And definitely an education too, between educating drivers and bikers and pedestrians on.
That's the scourge of cell phones is that distracted driving, and
yes,
you can see them coming, and you just hope you can get out of the way quick enough.
Right. Next one for you. How would you think we as planners and designers could help close the gaps between different user standards, choice versus dependent riders, Do you have any practical means in mind to move towards inclusive public transit by architectural design?
And I think we have some really good examples of that just here in the Quad Cities. So, when we were invited to be a part of the John Deere Commons, that was actually a bit of a controversial argument. Should public transit be in the heart of one of the city of Molin's biggest redevelopments? And bless their heart, John Deere said yes. And John Deere said yes because they worked with a company, HOK, out of Kansas City, that said if you're going to have a vital and vibrant downtown, you're going to have public transit front and center. And that was 20 years ago, Zach. So fast forward to today, have all designers and politicians embrace that? No, probably not. Some cities that are a little more bold and looking to really make a different looking footprint have embraced that. And I think it's paid dividends, in my opinion, over the long run. And I think really it goes back to that whole stakeholder piece. All too often we have decision makers that have never experienced public transit, and they've not experienced biking, and a lot of them haven't even experienced that pedestrian piece. So I challenge everybody before they make decisions to go out there and experience the different ways of getting around a community. And I think once people start realizing that there are alternatives and choices other than the automobile, I think that whole design starts changing. And I think all too often we get into a mode of this is the way we do it. And I think if our planners are going to be dynamic, they're going to have to come out of left field with different ideas. And those ideas, some have been conceptualized, some have not. And there's a development in Chicago underway right now. So taking advantage of the space above the electric lines outside of Soldier Field. It's a $30 billion end product. But Bob Dunn has realized that if transit and mobility is not a key part of that facet, it's not going to happen. So he wants to relocate a more dense destination for transportation and make a whole walkable community internally. So as you see developers like that challenge the norm, I think you're going to start seeing people look at how they invest their dollars and, more importantly, how they create those footprints.
Thank you. Next one, public transportation access is often linked to food deserts or areas where high quality, locally or organically grown produce is available within a quarter-mile walking distance, particularly in urban areas. When it comes to planning transportation networks, what consideration is given to access to healthy eating or living?
We look at that, and I think when we talked about really taking advantage of the technology that's currently available, we think that's key. And I was involved in testimony to Congress yesterday on that whole question of food deserts and also access to healthcare. And I think each one of them are uniquely local, and not all of us live within a quarter mile of any grocery store, but in all reality, we need to be very conscious on how we develop our communities, and more importantly, provide the access for everybody to that healthy lifestyle of eating, access to jobs, and more importantly, access to healthcare. So I think from our perspective, we're looking at microtransit being able to play maybe a larger role in those less densely populated areas that can provide that better access and maybe a quicker connection to some of those opportunities.
Next one for you. What suggestions do you have to reduce the animosity between drivers and cyclists and help everyone to realize that the road is truly public space for all? I think we kind of hit on that one a little bit ago.
I don't know. This last 18 months has been unique. I think there's been an increase in driver rage, and probably more importantly, people thinking they own the road versus have the opportunity to use it. And uniquely, we've added some technology to our buses that is scanning the system as it drives up and down the road, and it's dumping into a giant AI computer on Seattle, and it's giving us some predictability. So it's giving us predictability, the likelihood of Zach running that red light coming to work, so we can be conscious of different intersections that may be prone to that. But I think that whole animosity on who owns the curb is really going to have to come from our leaders, and define there is nobody that owns that curb. It's a community curb, and we all need to appreciate those using it in different formats.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. Next one for you. Does the existence of private ride-sharing services exaggerate low-income or high-income equity disparities?
It's an economic question, and clearly, yes. So those that have the ability to purchase their path around a community can do that. Uniquely on our apps, if you go to our app and pick your transit ride, we have that built in that'll show you what that Uber trip time and cost is. So you can make an economic conscious choice if you want to use public transit or Uber. And uniquely with the drop in number of Uber drivers, we look pretty competitive on a lot of days.
Yeah, that's good. How can we continue to expand our regional transit networks in the Midwest to make public transportation between cities like Moline and Chicago more economical and more of a first choice for potential riders? Are there plans to expand the Quad City Chicago transit line to other regional population centers like Iowa City or St. Louis?
Yes and yes. So is there going to be a direct train from the Quad City to St. Louis? Probably not. There has been a proposal to look at a corridor that goes from the Quad City. I call it that half moon down to Peoria, Bloomington, Normal, Decatur. So when you really look at connecting communities, you connect the density. So politically, Illinois it's an urban state and realizes the need for a variety of modes of transportation. Iowa's a little bit more of a agrarian or agricultural state, and is really focused on the individual car. So no matter how you look at it, the politics are going to drive really a lot of this until the general populace raises their hand and say, no, we want to go down this path. Right now, the corridor between the Quad City and Chicago will be 2 trains each direction, but they're going to structurally build it out to 5. So they're building in additional capacity in that system as they look to build it out right now.
Cool. Thank you. Next one for you. Do public access bike and scooter rentals like Divvy or I kind of already asked this one, like Divvy or Lime have a place in modern transportation networks?
We touched on that, and I said yes. I think you can see, and it's not uniquely just big cities. I think Cedar Rapids has some scooters in the downtown now, and I think ultimately you're going to see that evolution grow. Again, I think part of our challenge is the safety aspect of how we really manage those other wheeled mobility devices in a safe manner. But I truly think even in the Midwest, with our different seasons, I truly think the bikes and scooters are here to stay and will eventually become a mainstream in our system.
Great. Last one here, it looks like. Successful transit systems always seem to be lagging behind the development and growth of cities. When they are initiated, it is often difficult to integrate them into the city like the LA subsystem. Is it even possible to develop integrated mass transit systems in parallel with future city development?
It is, and it's actually happening. So I think you saw that whole development between the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I think you saw developers really building to the automobile versus the person. And I think you've seen a slow migration shift as you rolled it into the 80s and 90s. And I think in the 2000s, where we saw some of the most significant local referendums to bring transit and rail up to a much larger investment, you've seen the city plans change. Right now, even in Moline and Rock Island, if they got a plan change of some nature, we get that document. So we get to see it in advance and provide comment on it. So I think you're starting to see progressive cities really include transit in that development and expansion in their cities. Okay. But I also see cities that do not. So it's not uniform across our country that transit's at the table, but fortunately for here and in most places in Illinois, we are at the table. And I think as you see future development, even in our fastest growing cities, transit is a key component of that growth.
Okay. Looks like one more came in. This will be the last one, I think. This person says, I'm currently living in Stockholm, and there are 7 different scooter companies. In the US, many municipalities are against these devices. What design elements can architects or designers consider to promote safer storage when they are not in use?
That's probably one of the biggest challenges. And I see a lot of people that cut off their scooters at 10 because of the environment that grabs scooters after 10. We saw that even with the advent of growth in bicycles. So most of our cities develop sidewalks for pedestrian only, and most created roadways for cars only. And I think that true integration happens when you start developing it out. In fact, Zach, you're on the Planning Commission, and we're looking at a whole different design around this new area around I-74 bridge when it comes down. So we are actually physically looking at a whole design different standard that's really going to talk about that curb management, and it's going to be focused on moving people and not necessarily cars. And I think once you kind of shift some of those planning networks internally, I think ideas on how we can manage scooters and bicycles more efficiently and effectively then come to light.
Definitely. Yep. Great. It looks like those are all the questions for you. I want to thank you again for your presentation and your time with our Q&A session. It was greatly appreciated and always good to hear from you. Yes, especially on a Friday. That's right.
Last Wednesday of the month. That's okay.
Yeah. So now we're going to be taking a 15-minute intermission. Feel free to go to the restroom, get a drink, get a snack. We'll be returning here at 3:15. Looks like we're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule, but that's okay. And when we resume, we'll be moving into our panel discussion, which will take place right here. So we'll see everybody back here in 15 minutes.
All right, Zach, whenever you're ready.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Think Tank 2021, Transportation and Municipal Design. Up next, we have the panel discussion, which is worth 1.5 AIA learning units. There's our learning objectives there on the screen for everybody. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. First up, we have Alexandra Elias. I see that you prefer Alex. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. Alexandra Elias is the current president and CEO of Renew Moline, a nonprofit corporation that works closely with the city of Moline to advocate for redevelopment of the downtown. Alex joined Renew in 2018 after a 25 career working in local, state, and federal government. During almost 9 years at the Center City Development Corporation, the city of San Diego's downtown redevelopment arm, Alex was CCDC's project manager for the North Embarcadero, I knew I was going to mess up on that, visionary plan, a $280 million waterfront improvement plan, and she managed a comprehensive update of the downtown community plan. She later worked for the Navy's Southwest region for 7 years, managing land disposals, real estate contracts, and executing land conservation agreements in Nevada and California with entities such as the Nature Conservancy and the Trust for Public Land. Alex has an undergraduate degree in political science and French literature from the University of Iowa. She also holds a Master of Science in City and Regional Planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for being with us today. The next panelist is Dr. Joseph P. Schwederman. Dr. Schwederman is a professor in the School of Public Service, Department of Public Policy and Sustainable Urban Development Programs. He is an expert in the fields of public policy, transportation, and urban planning, and is the author of numerous books and peer-reviewed articles on the development of cities and transportation. Dr. Schwederman has consulted with prominent national organizations on planning and development issues and advised national trade groups and research organizations on trends in transportation. In addition to serving as the director of the Chaddick Institute, Dr. Schwederman serves as president of the Chicago chapter of the Transportation Research Forum. Dr. Schwieterman is frequently seen and heard on radio and television, making appearances on Chicago Public Radio and WBBM's Noon Business Hour. His work through the Chaddick Institute has also been featured in USA Today, Bloomberg News, and the Chicago Tribune, among other national publications. Welcome, Dr. Schwieterman.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dave Harrell. Dave serves as the president and CEO of Visit Quad Cities. Visit Quad Cities is the region's official destination marketing and management organization and is charged with driving positive economic development opportunities through tourism. Harrell leads the vision, strategy, and day-to-day operations of the private nonprofit community-based organization. The Visit Quad Cities professional team is responsible for sharing the QC story as well as competitively positioning the region for identity and growth while developing the overall visitor experience. Under Harrell's leadership, Visit Quad Cities has produced record annual visitor expenditures of $954 million and has set an ambitious plan toward the future. A proven executive with more than 20 years of experience, Harrell has a background in destination and brand marketing, administration, operations, strategic planning, business development, fundraising, government relations, communications, and nonprofit management. He is a native of St. Louis and a graduate of the University of Missouri. He earned a bachelor's degree in communication, He and his wife Connie and their two kids live in the Quad Cities and are proud Quad citizens. Welcome, Dave.
Good to be with you.
Good to have you here. And then up next, we have Paul Rumler. Paul Rumler has served as the president and CEO of the Quad Cities Chamber since 2018 and has 15 years of chamber leadership experience. He was recruited back to his native Quad Cities after being in Michigan for 2 years as the Grand Rapids Chamber's Chief Strategy Officer. Previously, he had been with the Quad Cities Chamber and its preceding organizations since 2006, serving in roles ranging from talent attraction and retention, community development, public policy, and economic development. Prior to his chamber work, Rumler worked in legislative government affairs in the Massachusetts State Senate and U.S. Congress. He has a degree in economics from Georgia State University and also attended Boston University and Black Hawk College. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Zach.
You're welcome. And last but not least is Jeff Nelson. He will be joining us on the panel as well, but I don't believe that I need to give him an introduction. So before we begin, if anybody has any questions for the panel, please ask them in the Q&A box, and we will respond to those at the end of the discussion. So I think just to kick us off, I'd just like to ask everybody here with us today, if you could just introduce yourself and give us a brief background about your perspective working in the region to address challenges associated with disinvestment as it relates to transportation and development. I'll start with Dave, since you're on my screen first.
So I drew the straw of the Brady Bunch quadrants, Zach. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it was you or Paul.
Flip a coin. Well, again, good to be with you. And Zach, thank you for leading this conversation. You know, I maybe will probably give a little bit of a different, spin on this from my perspective. And obviously, Jeff, we're so fortunate to have him here in the Quad Cities and just his wealth of knowledge and expertise, but relationships from a national perspective. I don't think people realize how lucky we are. So Jeff, thank you. I think I'd rather maybe take a different track of thinking about reinvigoration and reinvestment, at least from my perspective. And how I will couch this is this. I think the Quad Cities, and again, take out the pandemic, even though we're still kind of operating in the pandemic, and will be for quite some time. I think we've got a real unique opportunity to really leverage some things within the development space, more so than we probably ever have in our history. And I'm excited about that. And when I think about the Quad Cities and I think about where we're positioned geographically, when I think about the assets that we have within the region, with the economic development expertise that we've got here, quite frankly, I think we've got a knowledge base that is tremendous. I think really gives us some upside to think through how we're going to address the future. One of the things that we've done in our space on the destination side, we haven't had a long range, vision or strategy in quite some time for not only the organization, but really the region. So within our master planning and the things that we've worked on, we've got a bunch of core recommendations that we are chasing currently. But one of those is within kind of the destination development space as we think about improved connectivity and mobility, because that's a big deal for us. And it's something that sometimes we probably don't do the best of jobs in the tourism space, thinking through how do we intersect with people like Paul, Alex, and Jeff to think through transportation, motility. What does that visitor experience look like? How do we connect to capital investment and infrastructure as we're trying to create a destination that's a consumable for people that are coming here and experiencing the region. So we're really thinking through ways that we can be part of those conversations. Obviously we don't have the wealth of knowledge that these professionals do within this space, but what we can do is offer a perspective, insights from other communities, and really kind of boots on the ground data points to share what we're hearing from people when they come into the market. And there's literally nearly 2 million people that are coming into the Quad Cities on an annualized basis. And so how they perceive the Quad Cities, how they move about through the Quad Cities, what does that look like in terms of the things that they're connecting with within the development side of the world is something that we really feel we've got some opportunities to grow and improve. So that's a little bit of kind of where we're coming from, and there's some things that I know we're going to get into a little bit later, some specific projects that I think we can kind of draw to. But Zach, that's kind of how I'd answer that first question.
Great, thank you. Paul, you want to touch base on that? Just introducing yourself and your perspective of working in the region.
So Quad Cities Chamber, just for one point of reference, we are an organization focused on 3 main strategic areas of impact: business and economic growth. So we're also the economic development organization for a 6-county area in Iowa and Illinois. We also have multiple place management entities that manage business improvement districts that are part of our organization. And then the last major pillar is all about talent attraction and retention, trying to grow our region's population. So with that frame of reference, transportation and infrastructure is a critical element to have a growing, successful economy. We are actively engaged in the advocacy efforts at the state, local, and federal level to make sure that we have regional priorities that are advancing key issues. So I find myself in rooms talking about these topics quite extensively. And one of my biggest passion projects when I started in my career in 2006 was working with Mr. Jeff Nelson here on that passenger rail project that we are long awaiting for here in the Quad Cities to help get that funding. So my chamber actually stepped up to create a passenger rail coalition that led the charge to engage a grassroots network of supporters to help make the advocacy push to make that happen. So a little practice and history as to how we're engaged.
Very cool. Thank you. Dr. Schwederman.
Yes, fascinating presentation. And I direct an institute in downtown Chicago with the Chattanooga Institute for Metropolitan Development. We're just a block or so from the Art Institute, right in the heart of it. And I thought I'd take this answer in a somewhat different direction. In that, as a person that really loves to study the dynamics of cities and neighborhoods and transportation. His last year and a half have been, let's just be candid, really hard, because we're looking at, where cities are going to go post-pandemic. Will the jobs come back downtown? Will the people come back? And had we had this event last year, I probably would have declined the invitation, because it was just way too unknown, way too scary. And I think now that a year has passed, I would say a couple reasons, factors give me real optimism. One is, I think, there's tremendous spending power in our cities now. The economy is much better than we expected. If you read Cranes, people are coming back downtown. The rental market's been incredibly strong, especially in kind of walkable neighborhoods downtown. And that really surprised us, because we heard so many stories about the market for single family homes out in the burbs, where the walk score is 0 or whatever. And those markets are bouncing back with particular interest in neighborhood amenities, walkability, parks, recreation, eating, pleasure. I think on the negative side, I was a little more optimistic about the downtown commercial office business bouncing back a little faster than it has. And the second wave of the pandemic, of course, has slowed things down. But we're hearing more and more reports about permanently working from home, or flex schedules and things like that. And so overall, it's a mixed bag with how this is evolving. I would say the good news in the last 6 months has really outweighed the bad news, but we're still waiting to see if that office component is going to come back. And without that, we're going to have a much different city in the future. That said, I think a couple of speakers mentioned some of the mega projects in Chicago, specifically mentioned the names, but One Central over by the museum campus, and the 78 south of Roosevelt Road, of course, Sterling Bay's Lincoln Yards project. Those all seem to be moving ahead, and that gives me a lot of encouragement that we are going to see some more urban dynamism in the next couple of years, despite this very difficult 18 months we're coming out of. So a little later, I want to show you a chart or two about some work we're doing. And I've been telling my students it's a fun week, because I come in on Metra, and this is the first week I've had to share seats with other riders coming in. Instead of getting my 4 seats, the crowd's now back enough that we're feeling a little bit of energy on the trains as well. So I think October's been a pretty good month for downtown office, but we have a long way to go.
That's good news. Good news. Thank you. Alex, would you like to touch on that first question?
Thank you. And I will just touch on a little introduction of myself, because I think it's relevant to the conversation today. And so I grew up in Davenport, Iowa, which is right across the river. It's one of our quad cities. And I left for, like most of my friends at that time, we went to college, and then our goal was to get out of Iowa. And I've just come back. I've been back in the community about 3 years, but in that 30-year period that I was gone, roughly, I lived in Minneapolis, I lived in Washington, D.C., I lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for graduate school, and then 20 years in San Diego. And I think coming back to the community after living in those different places, I have, one, a much greater appreciation for the community itself. And I really think that in Dave Harrell and Jeff Nelson and Paul Rumler, we are so fortunate to have really effective community leaders that are thinking proactively about how we can grow the community, grow our industries, and then, remain competitive. And I think we're super fortunate in that. There was a lot about growing up here that I didn't understand until I went to planning school. And when I was young, we used to shop in downtown Davenport, and then we didn't anymore. So between things like, malls developing and the farm crisis, our downtown kind of evaporated. And so when I got to graduate school, it was like suddenly things made sense. And I was learning so much about things that I cared about and was passionate about. So the thing that brought me back to the community was this redevelopment opportunity in downtown Moline with the I-74 area. So Renew Moline itself, the organization that I work for, is a nonprofit, started largely by John Deere executives to redevelop old John Deere property. So in a lot of ways, Renew Moline was kind of built on disinvestment, and we've changed over the 32 years that we've been an organization. But I think our opportunities for new investment and reinvestment really comes in this I-74 area. So I'll leave it at that for the moment, except to say that we are really looking at public space in a different way as a formation of our city. We're defining public space in a different way, and I think that's really going to be the foundation of what we do in our downtown in that I-74 redevelopment area.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think some of that'll be, I'd like to bring up like talk about the form-based code later on down the road. I think that'll touch on some of those points as well. Thank you. How about Jeff Nelson? Would you like to touch on question number 1? You don't really have to introduce yourself, but just the perspective of working in the region and addressing the challenges associated with disinvestment as it relates to transportation and development.
Yeah, I think, kind of capitalizing on what has already been said. And I think, Paul kind of soft played his role in the community as well as Dave, because they are regional. So in some respects, we're a unique footprint of many communities. And when we really try to balance a unique planning element of multiple communities, it can be very challenging. I think Paul really moved us forward into a single chamber of commerce, a single economic development, and David had the opportunity to reformat the whole visitor piece of our community. And I think it's really pivotal for us right now. I think we're better prepared to reinvest in our community in the format of leadership with Paul and Dave. And bringing the experiences of Alex to town, I think, is going to be tremendously valuable for us. And as Dr. Sweeter talked a little bit about those mega projects in Chicago, I think we can likely face some similar opportunities with the space on the vacant I-74. And I think when we really look at that, is not necessarily, it is a disinvestment of an interstate that will be coming down, but a great reinvestment of one that joins it. And I think that the riverfront opportunity, the place is going to be significant. More importantly, when we talk about modes, it's probably going to be one of the first interstate bridges with a bike path on it. So when we really look at a place, I think Moline can be a great landing pad for really pushing the whole mobility urban footprint in a whole different direction.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and head on to another question here. Can you provide an example of how your organizations are helping to improve access to community assets and resources of those in disinvested communities? I'll go ahead and start with Paul on this one, or whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, as Jeff said, we represent so many different communities in the Quad Cities area, and each one has examples of disinvestment. You heard Alex talk about some of the flight away from downtown Davenport. I'll answer this question from our downtown place management organizations. We manage downtown Bettendorf, downtown Davenport, and downtown Rock Island. We collaborate with others, including Moline and East Moline and the like. But Rock Island specifically has been a leader in downtowns dating back to about 30 years ago. But after probably the high point of the 1990s, you saw a downtown not receive the continued investment that it needed, whether that be its transportation, its infrastructure, its business reinvestment area. They didn't have a sustainable model in which to fund improvements. They had a TIF district and that was about it, but they didn't have a way to really engage the business stakeholders in it and the property owners. So we've contracted with the city of Rock Island this past year to actually help guide them on creating a business plan with a sustainable funding model. And it's not a secret sauce. It's exactly what other communities have been doing for a long time, including Moline. We're creating a special service area. In Iowa, they call them a special service municipal improvement district. And that will incur, and this is being led by the businesses themselves that are saying, hey, we need to step up and do our part. And so the chamber is very proud to be part of that conversation. And that's been replicated in Bettendorf, Davenport, most recently with our help and involvement. So that's just one example of how we're stepping in.
Great, thank you. Dr. Schwederman.
Yeah, that's a fascinating comments. I'll say in a lighthearted way, we do 2 study trips a year with students, day trips. We get up early and go see somewhere. And the Quad Cities has always been on our orbit because, you know, a lot happening out there. You got 4 cities you could, and the rule is you got to have a bus or train to get there. And I think hearing you talk, we're going to have to explore coming out. But I just want to say, circling back to Chicago, you know, some work I'm doing now is to look at how new development is moving in directions that create all these urban planning challenges, and both for, you know, encroaching on marginalized neighborhoods and in building transit accessibility. And Justin, you want to pull up the chart number, table number 5, if you don't mind. And just want to show you some research we're doing. And there we go, a couple more right there. So this chart may give you a headache. So, but we have we built a file of all 1,300 buildings in the city that are over 12 stories tall, when they were built, what their uses are. And I've had a student meticulously go and get the walk and transit scores for all 1,300 buildings. So it's been, let's just say, I think I owe that student a steak dinner after this or something, because it's a tedious process. But we're watching how this is taking shape in Chicago. And one thing I want to point out is over on the far right, if you go west of the loop, you'll see the Fulton Market West Loop area developing. And just to sort of circle back to the discussion we're hearing about integrating housing to transit and so forth, 2 things are notable. One is that where the development is going there tends to be fairly auto-oriented. So we're seeing a surge of development right west of the loop that's, you know, probably 70% drive to work, even though the buildings are, you know, pretty tall, 15 stories in a lot of cases. And that's sort of challenging our walkability assumptions about downtown. At the same time, it's great for our city to see fresh new development at a time we really need it. You go a little bit west of there, if you look at the far west, you get into the manufacturing zone. So we have some tensions there between building a new neighborhood that's very residential oriented, kind of high end, and manufacturing where there's a lot of jobs that are dependent for lower income groups. So the challenge is to grapple with where development wants to go and how we're trying to build walkable neighborhoods. And I'll just say one second aspect of this project that's fascinating and frustrating at the same time is the city adopted a transit-oriented development ordinance. And developers can get exemptions from parking and so forth if they're within a quarter mile of a rail station. And if you don't mind, Justin, going back 1 or so slides. Just right, one more, right there. Oh, go right, one more. You just had it there. If you look at this map, you can see the Morgan L stop, which is a new CTA, relatively new CTA stop on the west side that's added an element of transit accessibility to this. And so developers within a quarter mile of that stop can get exemptions from parking requirements. We're finding in the West Loop, they're less interested in not providing parking than they are in other parts of the city. So it's a bit of a challenge to prod developers to take this new part of town and make it transit accessible. And there's so much vacant land south of downtown that's just hungry for development, that if we could just find better levers to sort of push and prod developers to go where the neighborhood would really welcome some new investment and not, so to speak, crowd in the West Loop, it would be really great for our city. So we're going to try to develop some recommendations on what this could mean for zoning and so forth. It's a good problem to have post-pandemic, to have a lot of developer interest in developing new neighborhoods that are walkable, but not so transit friendly, you might say. So I'll turn it back to you, Zach, and just wanted to share a little research we did.
Yeah, thank you. That's some interesting research you got going on there, especially with having your students do a lot of walking.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that, though. Let's see. How about Alex? Would you like to touch on that question as well?
Sure. And I would also like to encourage Professor Schwederman to come. I think from an urban planning standpoint, it's really interesting to be in a bi-state region because there are so many dynamics that related to that really are interesting I think from a planning perspective. But I think in terms of the, one of the things that I am becoming more and more aware of are the sort of generational differences between how someone my age, for example, and older would think about where they live and where they work, as opposed to somebody who's in their 20s or 30s right now. And I think as an organization, we are responding to that more than I've ever seen in my career. So we think of public space as sort of the great equalizer. It's public. Everyone has access to it, regardless of age, income, or physical ability. And that's really how we approach the work. So we recently got a grant. Well, recently it was 2.5 years ago now. We got a grant to do a public art and placemaking plan. We have a multi-pronged approach to funding that with the city. We've tried to concentrate those public art spaces in certain corridors to try and get, more of a bang for our proverbial buck, I guess. And so it'll be interesting to see, because the council just adopted that a couple of months ago, but the Public Art Commission has been established now. We hope to meet with them before Thanksgiving. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this gets underway. And then I also just wanted to mention that a lot of my time in other cities has been spent on transit. I didn't have a car for 9.5 years because a couple of months before I went to graduate school, my car got stolen. So I didn't buy another one, and I spent a lot of time on public transit in various cities. So, the challenge that we have with transit, and I will say that Mr. Nelson runs one of the most robust transit agencies I've seen in a small community. If you are going around anywhere in downtown, you see comprehensive transit station, comprehensive transit planning, you see buses everywhere frequently. And that is such an asset that people here just don't realize. But we don't have some of the motivating factors that you would have in terms of super high traffic, super high cost of parking. And so getting people to ride transit when driving is very easy is a unique challenge. And so as we think about redeveloping downtown Moline, I think our public spaces proximity to public transit will be some of the keys to our success and some of the keys to getting more people to ride transit and younger folks to ride transit. So that's a little bit on how we're thinking about this.
Thank you. Let's see, Dave, how about your thoughts on that question?
I'll try to be brief because I think we got some really good answers on this, but as it relates to disinvestment, I'll maybe take a different track and thinking through how we are activating some of the tourism assets and visitor economy driven things that we feel were maybe amiss, that we weren't owning up as a destination, organization. And as we think through things like bikes, right? And knowing how critically important that is to not only visitors, but residents, and how their quality of life and quality of place is being realized in their community. Our assets, our physical assets from a DMO perspective, were not being optimized. So we've made some strategic investments. We have formed a relationship with Trek. We have purchased 20 bikes that we will have strategically placed in destination centers here. within Moline and downtown Davenport and soon in Rock Island, where we used to charge for those. They will now be free because we want people to have access to them. We want people to utilize them. We want to create, in a sense, an opportunity for people to loop around the Quad Cities, knowing of the value of the I-74 bridge and that new asset and how we can mobilize that, but literally to be able to get on a bike and do a loop from that bridge to Rock Island and go over the Centennial Bridge and go through Davenport. And I don't know a lot of communities that can boast that experience up and down a world-renowned global asset, that being the Mississippi River. So I think that gives us a chance as a DMO for people like Jeff and Paul and Alex and others to say, all right, Visit Quad Cities, like, what does that experience look like for the consumer? How can we make that a real seamless enterprise? What does that look like as people are kind of traversing in and around our community? And does that set us up for opportunities for the future? And whether that's conversations in and around scooters, whether that's, you know, increased activation on our riverfront, whatever that is. So we have not done a good enough job as a DMO over the last, you know, decade with that. But now I think as these new things are coming online, it gives us a chance to think through what is our place within that space. How can we value add for our economic development partners? And it doesn't always necessarily have to be visitors, it's residents. And I think that shift fundamentally for our business is important. And so as we think about how people are moving in and around the region, we really want that to be a healthy and a vibrant opportunity for people. And I think you're going to see a lot more investment on the capital side from us, but then hopefully, working with our partners around the table to think through, what does that look like and how can we increase that? So that's something that we can use from a marketing perspective and a brand perspective as we're all trying to compete for, more population and quality of life and trying to get, talent, here and retain that talent. We got to come up with some things that are going to be unique. And I think we've got those assets that we can leverage.
Great, thank you. And I think you hit on the connection between the bridges and the new 74 pedestrian path and bike path. And
you have an image of that if you want to bring that up. In one of the first couple of slides, there's an image of the new bridge.
Well, Zach, and a lot of people don't realize, we have over 100 miles of trails and river pathways within the Quad Cities regional destination. And not a lot of communities can boast, that. And so I think the more we can think through holistically how we can leverage that, and certainly from an economic development perspective, build that into our marketing platforms, that's just a huge deal for us. And I think it gives us a chance to double down and really think through how we're making those strategic investments just to make the community more vibrant.
Yeah, definitely.
The next slide is the one that has the bike path shown on it. It's illustrated there in the lower right where it says pedestrian path. It's a 14-foot wide multi-use path, and then it approaches the scenic overlook that has an oculus that's glass, and you can look through that down into the river. And so those are some of the pedestrian features that are on the bridge and that are unique to the bridge.
Yeah, you had mentioned that being a good way to attract people to the QC and also a good way for residents of the QC to utilize. And I think I walk the bike path almost nightly, and I can't wait to be able to walk over the bridge and then if I'm feeling adventurous enough, I'll walk all the way down to Centennial and back around. So we'll see how long that is.
Will that scenic overlook be like in the middle of the river? I've never seen a bridge with that feature before. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep, directly over the center.
Interesting.
I guess on that question, on access, we're kind of grassroots, so we have provided some unique access to the assets. So we have unlimited ride programs now with Western Illinois, Augustana, and Blackhawk College, and we recently expanded that unlimited access to our Moline and Rock Island schools. So we've actually seen about a 30% increase in students using public transit in the Moline footprint, and part of that is, as Alec points out, how can you train a community to look at transportation differently? So we're working very hard, starting right out of grade school and into college, to really build a transit infrastructure thought in people's minds as they commute around the city.
I think as a point of education, that is such an important thing for children to learn, because if you know how to navigate a city on transit, you can travel anywhere and be comfortable. And I don't think people realize that until they've either traveled to a city in Europe where it really becomes necessary, or that, they grew up in a city and so they know that. But particularly in the Midwest, Midwest smaller communities, I think what Jeff is saying is just so important about, teaching kids to be comfortable in an urban environment, in a transit environment, in a shared environment.
Jeff, could you clarify what you say, unlimited rides? They essentially get a transit pass, or is there some other aspect of that?
They just use their school ID. So Western Illinois, Blackhawk, and Augustana invest in that. We're using our COVID recovery money with the Moline and Rock Island public schools to provide that. They don't have yellow school buses, kind of like in Chicago. So transit is a choice to get to and from school.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I know that's a major element down in where I went to college at Champaign-Urbana, with the Champaign-Urbana mass transit down there. And I think that's where I really learned to use the public transit that was available to me as a college student down there. And it really helped open my eyes to the rest of the cities as well. So I think it's a good item to have in your backyard. I guess while we're kind of on the topic of the 74 bridge, we keep kind of dancing around it and hitting on it here and there. The new 74 bridge represents a substantial recent investment in the Quad Cities region. As it nears its scheduled completion in 2022, how will this investment benefit the region? I guess I'll start with Paul on this one.
Wow, how won't it benefit our region? Let me start with, we're replacing a very outdated structure that was never meant to be an interstate bridge to begin with. I don't think we have a picture of the current bridge, but it was built as a 2-lane Mississippi River bridge crossing that then in the the 60s got extended to a 4-lane. So it has no shoulders on it. It's 2 lanes. If you have an accident, it gets clogged up. And there's about 75,000 vehicles that go across this bridge crossing on a daily basis. It's a major thoroughfare for everything from trucks and movement of commerce to people going back and forth to work. And as you've heard already, the Quad Cities is a region where we live in one city, we work in another, and I find myself personally going in probably across the river 4 or 5 times a day between activities and jobs and entertainment. So it's going to free up a major bottleneck in our area that's going to just relieve this pressure and make our community come together. The bridge has been a barrier. It's been something that people have avoided. People do not like to cross it. They don't like to get near it. They don't like to think about it. And so they've made life decisions based around this inoperable bridge. And so the new I-74 bridge investment is going to open up a lot of opportunity for commerce, for just free flow of people back and forth. I can't even articulate the development opportunities associated with this, but it's just an amazing opportunity. I'll let others expand on it.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be in Moline and Davenport and Bettendorf and Rock Island, the whole Quad Cities for sure. Yeah, Dave, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to jump in. I think Paul captured it so well. I think from our perspective, it's, and I love this shot, right? There was a photographer that we work with that captured this, and such a compelling illustration of something that I think we're all extremely proud of. And so many people worked on this project, which is, certainly one of the most impactful projects and initiatives in our community's, history. And it's such a big part of our brand and our narrative and how we're going to shape perception and our story in the future. I mean, it's a great economic development story, but certainly it's a huge part of our brand. I think it will be a gathering nucleus for our community on both sides of the river. It is definitely a connector. I think it's going to be an activator as we think through how we want to generate active lifestyles within our region, and the fact that you're going to be able to traverse, back and forth. It should be a real meaningful and immersive experience for people and visitors. And when we have people that come here in our community and they're calling us and emailing us and popping into our spots, all the time, they're asking about this asset, right? They want to know about the history. They're intrigued by it. They want to experience it. And I think the fact that now we can showcase, one of the world's largest, breadbasket handle bridges, and really kind of amplify that, but also kind of show the strength of our region. To Alex's, point, being this bi-state region, 2 states kind of coming together with multiple communities, working to get this project done. That takes leadership. It takes a lot of grit to be able to get something like this done. And the fact that now we're getting ready to realize this asset, I think there's got to be this massive sense of community pride. It'll be 3 years for me this November living in the Quad Cities. And to Paul's point, I drive over this thing, multiple times a day, and I geek off it. I just think it's a fabulous chance for us to really share that story of the Quad Cities and kind of where we're going and that future of how bright things are here. And so I can't wait to see it, fully come to form and function. And I think it's going to be just a great opportunity for us to leverage.
Yeah, definitely. Alex, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think if you want to back up a few slides to that overview, I can just point out a couple of things about just sort of the redevelopment area and some of the things we've been working on. So the area to the left, of course, is where the old bridge is. And you can see in the legend in the upper right-hand corner, the opportunity sites. We've sort of characterized that there are about 13.5 acres that become available. And then that secondary kind of light tan area is an additional between 12 and 20 additional acres. And so there's really a lot of redevelopment potential. And in the overview slide, so if you can go, I think one more maybe. That's just a slide where I put sort of everything that I knew we were working on. The council decided that they wanted a proposed riverfront park in the area immediately adjacent to the river. That obviously has not been designed yet. But if you go to the next slide, one of the things coming from San Diego that I have thought a lot about is, San Diego Bay is sort of right next to the downtown. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the connection to the water in this area where the old bridge is coming down. So the bridge that you're seeing in that picture right there is the old bridge. It is actually partially down in the picture, which is a little difficult to see, but you can see how much vacant, and really underutilized land. One of the unique things I think about Moline among the Quad Cities is that because John Deere owned so much of downtown and because a lot of that area was manufacturing, there wasn't an opportunity really for our historic downtown, the retail shops and restaurants that you would think of in being close to the river. And so we have been thinking a lot about the connection to the river, and the river as infrastructure, both as a port, as a recreational access, as an aesthetic benefit to our community. And so these are some of the things that we've been thinking about. And if you go, I think one more maybe. Yeah, so this is sort of illustrating the connection to the river and how important that is. And then the building in the lower right-hand side is an old warehouse building. It's called the Spiegel Building. And so we're also looking at ways to both reuse and make that building iconic and special. It's the first thing you see when you get off the bridge. It's really your welcome into downtown. The city does own it. And so we're trying to be thoughtful and careful about how we approach redevelopment of that city-owned asset. I think if you go one more, I have a picture of that building. There you go. So 2 years ago, we contracted, well, we actually put out a call for entries with our local Quad City Arts, our local arts agency, to try and really encourage people to think about the Spiegel Building as being an asset and a unique opportunity to do something special. And so we contracted with a young artist who did this work, and he's phenomenal to work with. His name is Brandon Meese. And he wrote the word possibility on pieces of plywood that we installed across the front of that building. And that's largely because we want people to be optimistic and eager, really, and excited about the redevelopment potential. You know, I mentioned at the beginning that I came back here because of this opportunity. I mean, from a city planning standpoint, you don't get to do this very often, and you certainly don't get to do it more than once in a lifetime. And so I think of this as very special. I think of it as a career capping opportunity, and I'm just, you know, super grateful to be involved in it.
Great, thank you. Since we're kind of on the topic, there's a question in the chat that I kind of want to touch on here. Since you had mentioned the waterfront and John Deere being a big owner of a lot of the land and a lot of the buildings down here. So the question is, in Peoria, where I grew up, Caterpillar has long been a primary employer. It has been stated, when cat is cut, Peoria bleeds. When top Caterpillar leadership moved to Chicago recently, it negatively impacted real estate prices in a big way, both commercially and residentially. Deere and Kone hold a similar magnitude in the QC, or are there other sufficient large employment centers to help mitigate the damage of big corporate changes? What other large companies are being courted to move to the QC?
Hey, Zach, I think that one's up my alley.
Yeah, I think that's right up your alley, Paul.
Steve, thanks for the good question. Let me start off by saying we have been recognized in the Quad Cities region as being the third most diversified economy in all metro regions in the country. Back in 1979, we would not have been able to say that. We were the farm implement capital of the world. We were so focused on that one area of industry that we were decimated as a region in the 1980s when you had the farm crisis that Alex talked about. We have hit rock bottom, and we are nowhere near that anymore. I can tell you that Deere and Rock Island Arsenal are their two top employers. So we have a federal military installation that has almost 7,000 employees, and it is a diversified asset in and of itself. It's not all a manufacturing arsenal. It's only 1,000 employees that are a manufacturing arsenal. The others are major military commands that manage logistics, manage the Guard Reserve. They're diversified in and of themselves. John Deere is equally sizable, has about 7,000 employees. They have their global headquarters here. They also have about 5 or 6 different manufacturing facilities across our area. I say that that's diversified because they're not just making one piece of equipment here. They're not just selling them to one destination or one type of customer. So as you look at even the John Deere footprint, they're extremely diversified in our community. As a organization, we've been prioritizing diversification within the supply chain. So we are still heavily dependent on manufacturing, where 20% of our region's employers are in the manufacturing industry. However, the best thing is that they are not just tied to one specific OEM. They're not just tied to one contract. They've done a really good job to make sure they've diversified their customer base and client base. So that way they're just not at the whim of a John Deere or a Caterpillar or something of that nature. So I'm very confident that our community can weather a storm. Obviously, we do bleed green and gold. And so if that were to happen, obviously there'd be pain. I'd be an idiot if I didn't acknowledge that. I can tell you that we're a much more resilient community today than what we've ever been. And I'm really happy to say that across our community. Steve, I'd love to tell you who we're recruiting, but I can't. We have a pipeline that is as big as you've ever seen it. We just landed the largest economic development deal in our region's history with Amazon opening up a robotic fulfillment center in North Davenport, which is amazing. We had a company called Dividose, which was a startup pharmaceutical company that started in Rock Island, moved to Moline, and has now expanded their headquarters into Davenport. So they still have a strong presence here. They just did a buyout by United Health Group, a $300 million buyout for a startup doctor who had this great idea less than 10 years ago. And so they're now headquartered in our community. So we have everything from high-tech startups like Dividose to legacy Fortune 100 companies like John Deere or a military asset. But what we're focused on is innovation. And what we talk about throughout our community is how do we make sure that we're tapping into the great ideas that our community has, whether it be from our colleges and universities or from our companies that have very valuable research and development aspects within their companies, to make sure we're leveraging that as a region. And I'm really excited about how we're doing that right now.
Great, thank you, Paul. That was really good. Let's see here. I kind of want to touch base with Dr. Schwederman here. I know we've been talking about the 74 bridge and how that investment will help benefit our region. Is there anything similar in the Chicagoland that you're working or that you've seen recently that's kind of a similar scale to what the bridge is for us here?
Well, I'll say a couple things and nothing directly parallel to that, but I do think one thing I'm hearing and taking away from the Quad Cities, even the Peoria discussion in particular, is both places, maybe the Quad Cities in particular, have the benefit of agglomeration, that there's sort of a large enough population in both cases to sustain a large airport. You have multiple corporate headquarters. The Quad Cities, you got the benefit, and I say this somewhat non-disparagingly, but you're only half in Illinois. So you don't have all the Illinois problems that come with being on our side of the border with, pension issues and that sort of thing. So when I look at the future.
Hey, Joe, it might be only half of our community, but we still get all of Illinois' problems.
We export our problems pretty well, probably. But you look at the future of a lot of rural counties downstate, and I'm not, we'll mention like somewhat larger cities, Danville and places that are probably projected to shrink as a metro area just by the nature of the trends we're seeing. And I don't think either the metro areas, just described Peoria, Quad Cities, face that same problem because they have their robust manufacturing base and the agglomeration to offer amenities that can attract, Amazon, I just heard, for example. And Amazon's big hub is in Rockford, so you're close to that, and there's a lot of advantages there. So I think in Chicago, just to shift gears, I think one thing we are seeing post-pandemic is finally a push to integrate our transit system to break down the silos. And if you're not familiar with our region, it's among the best in the world from a transit system or commuter rail standpoint, you might say, or at least in the United States. But the integration is really pretty poor. There's not a single spot where CTA rapid transit converges with our metro system. Like in New York, you'd have a Grand Central Terminal where everything comes to one point. We don't have that. And even to add to that, our intercity bus system, Greyhound goes from a different spot, and the airports, of course, are not served heavily by intercity rail at all. So we're seeing as a wake-up call in the pandemic, finally to start thinking about walkability and transit, and intercity travel as a as a network that has to be more tightly choreographed to get people out of their cars. And I'm involved in an effort now to study getting intercity trains to O'Hare, just to explore whether we should, how we should raise the visibility of this. The Midwest High Speed Rail Alliance has been pushing a proposal to make Union Station kind of a focal point where things would come together and be a connecting point, for lots of transit trips where now you have to buy 2 different tickets and walk across the loop from one line to another. And I think we're seeing the pandemic has sort of sped up the, lowered the resistance, you might say, to these things. Go to the right one slide, if you wouldn't mind, Justin. Want to mention a couple things that we're with integration of Amtrak and commuter rail. We actually have one new station that was created, and this is a Joliet picture here, where Metro and Amtrak come together. And there's a lot of good things happening on the Chicago-St. Louis route that could finally make our regional network better. And I think the projections are, I've been carefully studying this, that while the outlook in the pandemic is not great for commuter rail, and McKinsey, the consulting firm, actually forecasts that non-business travel on Amtrak by 2024 is going to exceed pre-pandemic levels. So we do know that intercity passenger rail is likely to see a lot of strength in the pandemic, for the same reason that airlines are pretty bullish too about pleasure travel bouncing back really fast. Of course, for the Quad Cities, the state's funding for the infrastructure improvements on the old Rock Island route to get Amtrak to the Quad Cities. Let's hope that happens sooner rather than later, and be exciting for our state. So we do see intercity services, airports, and rail being a real source of strength post-pandemic, and commuter rail is a bigger question now, whether we're going to return to 70% of where we were pre-pandemic or 80. I think we may settle in closer to 80, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about how we need to modify the system to make it work together, all the way from people using scooters to people flying airplanes. So there's a sense of living without a car-heavy lifestyle. Things work together. Go one slide to the right, Justin. There we go. This slide I put in without knowing how timely it was going to be. And I suspect you folks in the Quad Cities may see FlixBus sooner rather than later. But one thing that happened really exciting this week is that FlixBus, which is a German-based company that has a massive share of intercity bus market in Europe, had a big announcement, and they started service to Chicago just in July, and they serve Chicago to Columbus, and then up to Milwaukee and the Twin Cities. And we think FlixBus is likely to start lots of new services from Chicago's neighborhoods. So unlike Greyhound, which leaves from a central terminal, FlixBus likes to have lots of stops throughout the city. So they could have, I have no idea what they're going to choose, but we could end up with intercity services from Hyde Park or Lincoln Park or Park Ridge or whatever, all around our region, which will help, I think, give new options for car-free travel by the fact we have a bus company that's really excited to grow in the United States and seems determined to make itself a household name. And just yesterday, you guys might have heard, FlixBus announced they had purchased Greyhound lines, which is like a massive development for the industry. So we think FlixBus will keep Greyhound as is, but perhaps invest in Greyhound to have two different products. One, the traditional intercity bus and Greyhound, one, the more slick, high-tech approach of FlixBus. And they plan big expansion this year. So on the intercity side, there's a lot of optimism that cool things are happening that could, make urban living much more attractive than it was before. And coming out of the pandemic, we just didn't know if we would have this kind of energy for rail and bus, but we're feeling it right now. So a little diversion from the main topic, but some exciting news nonetheless.
Yeah, I think that's good. Jeff, I saw you unmuted yourself there for a little bit. Did you have a comment you wanted to make, or?
Actually, Dr. Schwederman kind of hit it on. I think with FlixBus coming to America, it's going to be presenting some new opportunities and some really new looks at how we get people around our communities. So I think the success in Europe, if they roll that out comparably with what they've done there, I think we're going to see a dynamic change. And I don't think it's just being exclusively Chicago, because they're already looking at those major destination markets and how they may be able to amalgamate them into a more fluid system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think overall, though, there's a lot of the intercity bus system fared poorly in the federal bailout bills. So there was really some question of whether, Greyhound could survive it, so to speak. And so this news isn't all bad, though it's, of course, scary for people at Greyhound, seeing just how fast things are changing.
I'm going to switch gears completely here before Paul leaves us. I know you sent in a slide on the I-80 bridge. I think it was you anyway. It was either you or Dave.
I did throw something out there for the Bison Bridge.
Yes, I didn't know if you wanted to touch base on that and just talk. It's kind of a similar line to the 74 bridge where we have a bridge that's nearing the end of its lifespan, and they're looking at doing something different and reinvesting into an older structure.
Yeah, so Justin did me a solid and didn't even go to the slide for the Bison Bridge, but he is on the most fascinating piece of our riverfront here in the Quad Cities. And I'm going to just touch on this for a hot second. What you're looking at is the lock and dam that then is part of the government bridge, which is a railroad bridge, and a really, really old, almost 100 some old year government structure. It's a bridge between Rock Island and Davenport. And then in the background, you see the Centennial Bridge and another railroad bridge. And you see some riverboats cruising through there. I mean, this is an amazing piece of infrastructure that we oftentimes don't talk about in the Quad Cities. We were just recognized as one of the top 50 ports in the entire US. We hadn't been recognized as a port before 2020. We finally are on the map for recognizing the amount of commodities and goods that get shipped in and out of our Quad Cities region. It was like having a city without being identified as a city beforehand. So this is a very untapped port concept. You heard Alex talk about how we think of ourselves like this, but there are almost 70 plus private ports along our riverfront in our area that move so much, from oil to corn and grain to pieces of manufactured equipment up and down the river that go across the world then to China and Europe. So it's an amazing piece of infrastructure that is underinvested. Talk about disinvestment. Lock and dams, I think, are the poster child for disinvestment. These things are crumbling. So we need some help in that. And that's probably not going to be addressed in the big rebuild package, because it's actually out of it's escaping me, but it's the other package out of natural resources. But Jeff, you know what I'm talking about. Help me out. So let's flip to my last slide, Justin, to get to the I-80 bridge. So on the left is the 4-lane I-80 span that connects Iowa to Illinois. This is on the north part of the Quad Cities area. It needs to be replaced. It's on the schedule here in the next decade to be replaced. We have a very innovative guy in the Quad Cities called Chad Pagracki. He leads this charge. He envisioned creating a replacement. So when this bridge is replaced, he wants to maintain the structure. leave it up, and he wants to create a bison bridge, is what he's called it, which is the picture in the bottom right. We do not have bison currently in this area, but what he wants to do is have herds of bison that live in both Illinois and Iowa that then span the river over this newly retroed bridge and have it be a major destination, a national park. And this has traction. We love this idea. People in the Quad Cities love this idea. It's gained traction from Chicago to San Francisco and around the world. They're like, oh my God, this is going to be a talk about placemaking and leveraging existing infrastructure in a whole new way. So you'll see on the right-hand side, you'll see it's made for pedestrian access. You won't be right next to a bison, like face to face, but they'll be on the other side enjoying life, and you can get up close and personal. This is a really cool asset and feature that we hope to realize here in the next decade.
If I could just expound on that a little bit, and Paul's absolutely right. I think it's taking an asset and really flipping the script and repurposing something and creating a sustainable model, and really sort of reinforcing how you can use something like this old bridge and create something that future generations can enjoy. And there's so much traffic as it relates to that I-80 corridor, the most traveled interstate in the United States. And Chad's, vision, along with the consensus that's really been, building and the momentum, this is something that could really help position our region. And then you think through just the diversity of having these bridge assets that we all have now at our disposal, from the government bridge and the lock and dam and a swing span, bridge and that concept, and how we activate the river, to something like this with the I-74. It's just a real unique way to kind of activate the Mississippi River. And there's so much traffic, not only from a commerce perspective, and to Paul's point, the commodities and the things that are happening from an economic development perspective, but just how the Mississippi is going to be activated in the future. We've got Viking River cruise lines, which will start here in July of 2022. They've already sold out for 2022, 2023, and they're going to do a subscription for 2024. And I think the demand is so high that they'll sell that out too, because people are intrigued about the Mississippi River, and that's global, influence. And so you take at least a minimum of probably 10 stops with Viking, along with all of the other cruise lines that are, part of our portfolio, like American Cruise Lines and others. You're going to have anywhere from probably low end to 30 to high end 50 river cruise lines that are going to be activating the Mississippi River. And that's a significant amount of people, traversing up and down the Mississippi, really consuming the Quad Cities. So it's a great way to again, to Paul's point about diversification of our economy and being the third most. Think about how now we're activating the Mississippi River in a real meaningful way, from recreation to activation to commerce to all of the things that we should be doing. And if we can get the capital investment and do the things that we need to do to invest to create a better product experience, I think it really sets us up for the future very, very well.
Great, thank you. And there's another question in the chat, kind of touching on the tourism aspect there, from Steve Bly. He says, as tiny Galena has become a major destination for big city getaways and retirement, is the QC working with Galena to create a larger combined footprint tourist destination, or working against Galena to siphon off some of their tourism that is generated from Chicago, Minneapolis, Des Moines, etc.?
No,
Where's Galena?
It's interesting. So when we talk about the Quad Cities, it's really a family of communities. We don't even ever mention like the 5 cities within the Quad Cities. In our branding, we talk about the 58 communities that are part of our platform. We've got a very healthy relationship with Galena, and the fact that they're an hour and a half up the road. Actually, their CEO, my counterpart, is actually from Moline and went to Moline High School. So we've got a great relationship with Rose Noble and her team. And actually, as you think about tourism, and Chicago is our largest feeder market in the Quad Cities, and certainly it is, for Galena. It just underscores the fact that people sometimes are looking to get out of some of these larger metros and experience, smaller communities. Now, I wouldn't really necessarily couch us as a smaller community, but if you look at our community from a destination perspective, along with markets like Galena and others up and down the Mississippi River, from Dubuque to Iowa City to Burlington, et cetera, our product is very unique. And I think just the diversity of what we can offer here. What's unique about Galena is I think we punch above our weight in terms of that small town kind of feel that we offer up. I mean, go to LeClaire and walk up and down the streets of LeClaire and experience the Mississippi River Distilling Company, or grab a bite to eat, or hit one of those shops. I mean, it's almost like a mini Galena, right? And so I think the fact that you've got a product like that versus something, like Davenport or Moline, I think gives us the diversification that we need. But we do work very closely with Galena. We collaborate with them on a lot of things. There are a lot of people that go to Galena that actually have interest in coming in the Quad Cities and vice versa. So I think there's a lot of harmony between the two markets. I mean, certainly we compete on the leisure side of things, but on the meetings and the B2B side, that's just not something that's really kind of in their scope, because they don't have the facilities like we do. It's a very different market.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch gears here again and get back to another point of topic. I guess what are your primary concerns regarding the current state of our regional infrastructure, and in conjunction with that, what are your primary goals to go along with that? I don't know if you have a couple minutes before you leave there, Paul, if you want to touch on that, or.
I'll take the bait. And the screen that you have up is a great depiction of the Quad Cities region. Thanks for having that up there. What you see is the Mississippi River in the middle, crossing from the top right to the bottom left. And Rock Island County is this section in the peninsula between the Mississippi River and the Rock River. It's a really interesting geographical depiction of why we have so many bridges. If you've been on this call for the last 2 hours, you've heard the word bridge mentioned countless times. We have 3 interstate crossings that go across the Mississippi River, but you'll see just countless of opportunities to cross over water, which has been a barrier for growth. What my major concern is just how can we do this in a period of time where making sizable investments isn't all that attractive. It's been a decade plus since the last federal bill. The states don't plan in similar matters. Illinois steps up big time when it comes to making capital and infrastructure investments. People love to take shots at Illinois, but let's give them a lot of love and attention and accolades where it's due. And transportation infrastructure is one area that they are extremely strong in. It's why we're a state that has a powerhouse of Chicago and everybody like the Quad Cities in between. Is because of our location and our transportation infrastructure assets. Iowa doesn't plan at the same degree as Illinois. They don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the resources, they don't have the same methodology when it comes to bonding and paying for major infrastructure. So they don't think as big as Illinois does. So what I'm trying to describe is this complexity for our region of how do you span multiple jurisdictions that cannot and will not think along the same lines and get a system in place. We have a world-class transit system in Jeff Nelson Metrolink. It only covers half of our area. You talk about limitations. There's a university in Davenport, St. Ambrose University. They'd have to do probably 3 bus transfers before they even got to the airport, and they'd be using 3 different, maybe 2 now because they've had some consolidation, but they'd be using 2 completely different transit providers in order to get there. It is not a seamless system, and we have to fix that. If we want to truly function as a region, we can't just expect that this is going to happen. And I'll be challenging of our planners in our community. We have a passive approach to transportation planning. Instead of that, and by that means it's like what happens in Rock Island, great, Moline, great, it just happens. We need somebody to be forcing the issue and saying, how do we actually tap into the potential of our tremendous region and get on the same page? And we need some leadership to step forward to make that happen, because we've been living in this world for the last 100 years and it's gotten us really far, but it's not going to work in the next decade, not even the next 100 years. We need to figure this out quickly.
Great, thank you. Did you have something you wanted to add there, Alex?
Yeah, I think just since we haven't really talked about this, and Paul just mentioned the river, I know Paul has to go, but one of the other things that the region is very different philosophically on is flood protection. And so as we are looking at, our redevelopment area right there next to the bridge, one of the things that we're trying to pay attention to is what's that right balance of, kind of preserving natural areas and allowing flooding to happen versus development where, people have made significant investments and they don't want it to flood. So that's one of the issues I think that our region has grappled with. Davenport has just made a decision that it's green space, it floods, they deal with it. And so, I think Paul's probably better equipped to speak on the impact that has regionally, but I know as we're thinking about downtown Moline, the concept, and, when I think about what I'm worried about, I think addressing that flood protection question is a really important one.
Yeah, definitely. Dr. Schwederman, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. One, Alex, as Andrew mentioned, that we say flooding is sort of the new environmental hook that the typical homeowner can now relate to on the environmental agenda, because they feel it here in Chicago when their basement floods or their streets are closed. And, it's an interesting new way to sell a green agenda because of that. But I heard, listen to you guys talk, it occurred to me just how difficult both Chicago and the Quad Cities had leveraging their waterfronts to tap into the tourist potential and the aesthetic potential and so forth. And, we in Chicago have a lake that's, a magnificent resource, mainly for outdoor recreation, but we've never really been able to fully leverage our riverfronts and waterfront to its full potential. I think the rebranding of Navy Pier, which is underway, has potential now to make the lakefront somewhere that you just don't go to go once and say, I've been there, done, but more of a vibrant destination. But particularly our waterfront along the river, where I feel like in the last 18 months, we finally figured out how to use the Chicago River to make that a real place that attracts people, that fills a gap that Chicago doesn't have. Somewhere you can go at 10 o'clock at night on a weeknight and feel the energy in the summer of people ambling and enjoying themselves and being outside. But it was really hard to get it done. And it's going to be hard to extend the magic much further south. And I expect the Mississippi River is similar to that, you're not, it's such a gigantic transportation workhorse that it's not like the Seine River in Paris, where people amble across the river and enjoy the scenery. And the concept of a bridge, like you described, that has a huge placemaking role with the Bison Bridge or whatever, is just fascinating, because it would in effect link your towns together with something that leverages the waterfront in a way that's really novel. So I think it's when you speak of waterfronts, it's really a matter of an experimentation and creative thinking post-pandemic to make these spaces work. I would say in our region on the infrastructure side, we have the specter of really bad traffic that's going to rear its ugly head. And I think serious proposals for different kinds of congestion pricing are going to have to enter the mix. Also, a transit system that needs a lot of freshening up. So I think we're really hopeful the infrastructure package gets through to help us with that. But it's interesting, the parallels between the Twin Cities and Chicago, both big industrial cities that are leveraging these assets that have gone underutilized for so long. And I'll say one last thing for our region is I think you can see on this map here that one concept that we have enjoyed in Chicago and the placemaking side is that if you look at Grant Park in the middle of the picture here, we now have development on 3 sides of Grant Park. And that's given this area a whole different feel than when I started at DePaul back in the mid 90s. That's almost like Central Park in New York, except we don't have development on the east side, of course, because that's protected lakefront. But even during the pandemic, it's exciting to come down and see the gathering that occurs on Lollapalooza and Ribfest and everything else downtown that has made downtown Chicago kind of this has some cultural magic to it, despite all our problems in the last year. So the architectural community is hugely important to help build these spaces that energize these older industrial cities.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question here before we wrap things up. I'll ask each one of you this question, kind of touching base with the architectural community there right at the end. What recommendations or requests do you have for designers regarding regional transportation infrastructure? Are there ways they could more effectively serve the public good? I'll start with.
Step at that one.
All right.
So I think Alex touched on a little bit about a sense of place. So in almost all our projects of recent, we haven't built just a transit hub. We're trying to build a destination. So be it your project with the train station that is really a more vibrant footprint of restaurants, retail, hotels, and a train stop. Across the tracks, we got Center Station. That's part of the John Deere Commons. That's a place. It's a destination. And I think we need to take that out even in a smaller footprint. When we look at Fifth Avenue out in front of your office there, we are conscious on building the transit stops, the bus stops along there with some greenery. So we got a little garden piece with trees and bushes around each of the stops that can be a multi-purpose. So as you look at this, these are great opportunities to build transportation infrastructure in the whole design of a community. And I think if you can consciously look at each stop as a place, I think you start then creating a different feel. And Alex talks a little bit about the art piece. That's going to be a component that's going to be driving really a lot of elements in our downtown to make it more attractive and probably more importantly, just purely usable by more. So a transit stop doesn't have to be exclusively for somebody waiting for a train or a bus. And I think once you build this whole sense of place in, I think it really kind of changes the whole complexion of what your downtown or even your extended suburban area might look like.
Do you have anything to add to that, Alex?
No, I'm sort of reminded of a conversation that I had with a traffic engineer relatively recently, and they said that they consider the street to be curb to curb, not the sidewalk, not the building fronts. And so I think one of our challenges is to educate, more than just the general public on what is the public realm, how can we make it better, how can we make our streets accessible to all and usable to all and a pleasant experience. And so as Jeff was talking, I was just thinking about that conversation.
Great, thank you. Dave, you want to touch on that question as well?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I just think, Jeff's comments about sense of place are critical because we're all trying to figure out how to differentiate our communities. And again, like I said from the outset, I'm a firm believer that communities are consumable brands and need to be treated as such, in terms of, look and tone and feel, color, vibrancy, public art. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, relegated to physical assets or parks or facilities. It should really be out in within kind of the transit community and the public space that people are engaging with. And it should be different. It should be something that from time to time can be, thought provoking. Obviously, there's some functionality to it, and there's wayfinding components and all these kind of things. But I also feel like you've got to continually invest in them to move the needle. Like we've got some signage here in our community that's very, very dated. I will tell you, when people come into the Quad Cities, they have absolutely no idea if they're in Rock Island, Illinois, Moline, East Moline. We had people here a couple weeks ago, and they didn't know if they were in Iowa or Illinois. Now, that's not necessarily the resident perception, but that's the people that are coming here to have an experience, and whatever that looks like, whether it's a business meeting, they've got a meeting with John Deere and they're coming in from hopefully soon Germany, or it's somebody coming in for a youth sporting event and they're coming in from Chicago or Wyoming. It doesn't matter. And so I think these are the things that we need to continually just have conversations around in terms of just how do people perceive the Quad Cities? Like, what is that perception as we try to build, reputation and to try to do that. But then there's also some things, and we call it like the fundamentals. Like, we kind of joke in our space, like, you got to cut the grass, right? You got to get your trash picked up. You got to do things that are just the low hanging fruit. So that when people are here, they're like, that's a community that, yeah, I want to go back to, I want to visit again. And maybe I want to live there one day or relocate a business or start a business because I just have this emotional connection to it. I feel good about it. And I think that's all about what, place strategy, is. And I certainly think how you're interacting with the community and moving about is a critical piece of that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, those are all really good points, for sure. Dr. Schwederman, do you have anything else to add to?
Yeah, just give a few closing thoughts. I think as I look at Chicago, I think we have some basics to concern ourselves with that maybe the Quad Cities don't have so acutely. And one is just perceptions of safety on public transit. That's probably been the single biggest issue that threatens our response, recovery during the pandemic. And it's a unique challenge to the big cities, I think, where the perception of safety is reared its ugly head. That said, I think the deck has just been redealt, you might say, during the pandemic. That Chicago is actually growing in population again. So all the perceptions that post-pandemic the city was going to empty, we're seeing a lot of immigrants move to Chicago, a lot of young people moving back. And we just have to know the world's different now. They want to ride scooters. They, of course, want walkable neighborhoods. They have lots of spending power, but they may not be traveling to the office downtown as much. And that's really going to force us to try and experiment with new things. And in our region, we do know that, 3 agencies, PACE, Metro, and the CTA, the barriers have to come down, the walls, and we start thinking about more express bus services around our region that don't just keep doing more of the same as a loop-centric transit system. But fortunately, as I mentioned, there's some pretty good fundamentals, and the rising fuel prices are going to help transit as well. So these next few years are exciting yet scary at the same time for all this.
Definitely. All right, and with that, I'm going to close our panelist discussion. Thank you, everybody, for the thoughtful discussion that we had today. It was great input and feedback and all that fun stuff. I'm going to go around the horn here real quick to each of you, and if you just give me just a little brief snippet about where the audience can find more information about you, your work or your practice, where can they connect with you, whether that's like LinkedIn or website, email, Twitter, whatever social media you use, and then if you have anything else to plug. So I'll start with Dr. Schwederman, since you were the last one speaking there.
Yeah, well, I love the plug opportunity. Two things. Go to our website. We have free downloads of. We started a new thing. It's the Chaddick Institute, CHADDICK Institute for Metropolitan Development. We're part of DePaul, and we started a new thing called briefs. These are like 10-pagers that focus on interesting, timely topics. Lots of graphics, and so we have a bunch of stuff on Amazon and how they're changing the way we're moving about. And we'd just love to get you involved in an event. Like I say, I hope to bring some students out to Quad Cities after hearing this, so we might be in touch. Also, I am head of the Transportation Research Forum, which is just a great group. Memberships is $50 a year, and we have members only events. We have a small group discussion next Thursday to talk about interesting things happening in the transportation world. And if you're interested in joining our network, just check out the Transportation Research Forum website. So commercial is over. Thank you, Zach.
Great, thank you. Let us know when you come down here, and I'm sure one of us will give you a tour around.
I love it. Okay.
Jeff, you want to go ahead and give a brief
Sure.
plug?
I am on LinkedIn, and we also at Metrolink and APTA are on Facebook and all the social media pieces. We're at metroqc.com is our website, and APTA is just very simple, apta.com. So either one of them can be a great resource of things we're doing here locally, as well as what we're doing on a national level.
Great, thank you. And Dave, I see you're unmuted.
Sorry, I wasn't following proper protocol, Zach.
Okay.
My bad. I unmuted too early. Visit quadcities.com, pretty ubiquitous. I think there you'll probably find the most comprehensive resource within our region in terms of who the Quad Cities is, what the Quad Cities is, and what we bring to the table, along with some unique facts about us. And some things that make us unconventional and certainly very authentic. We've got every social platform that you can shake a stick at, so you can find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all those wonderful platforms. We're not on TikTok yet, but we will be launching that by the end of the calendar year, and we'll see where that goes. But I would encourage people to connect with quadcitiespro.com, because that's not just necessarily something for Quad citizens. I think it's something that really helps round out our destination and the assets and amenities that we're so proud to share. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and always happy to connect. And certainly, Dr. Schwederman, if you're ever in the Quad Cities, we'd love to do a community tour for you. That is something that we do for visitors. And I'm just grateful to be part of this discussion today. It's an important one. And we've got a tremendous amount of momentum and a very bright future ahead. And I'm excited about it. So thank you for the time.
Definitely, thank you. And last but not least, Alex, you want to go ahead and give a plug?
Yes, thank you. renewmoline.com. I am on LinkedIn, and you can follow renewmoline.com on Facebook. If you go to our website, I would encourage you to look at the banner across the top of the page and look for a title called Big Ideas, and there you will find our public art master plan. We also contracted earlier this year with the Urban Land Institute to look at some ways to rethink our urban waterfront that we were talking about today. So I didn't go into detail on any of that, but it is under our Big Ideas banner on our website. So I appreciate the invitation to participate today. It was an honor to be among such great folks, and I thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you for your time as well. It was greatly appreciated, everybody. And we just have a couple of last minute things to go through here. Just a reminder that this you can receive AIA credit for attending this panel discussion, and if you attended the keynote address beforehand. If you forgot or you missed putting your AIA number into the event registration, please email Justin Banda at jbanda@leggett.com with your name and AIA number. Not everybody needs to do that. Again, only if you missed the slot in the registration. And then everybody that attended today, next week we'll be sending out a post-attendee packet that will include the panelists' suggestions for further reading, as well as ways to get in touch with the panelists. And then just another reminder that we have a competition going on currently. Registration is open now through November 7th, and winners will be announced at the final think tank on November 12th. The competition for this year is Equalizing Everywhere, the Global Playground. Equalizing Everywhere is an ideas competition for designing the future of playful learning in communities around the world. For more information, you can go to the link that has been posted, and registration, like I said, is open right now, and winners will be announced on November 12th at our next think tank event. Speaking of our next think tank event, it will be our fourth and final think tank event, and that's happening again on November the 12th. And registration for that is now open, and we will be discussing design for health and well-being. And that event will be hosted by Sepida Asadi, and Justin will put a link in the chat for everybody to register. Again, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists today. Alexandra Elias, thank you. Dr. Joseph Schwederman, thank you as well. Dave Harrell, thank you. I know Paul Rumler dipped out early on us, but I'd like to thank him as well. And then our keynote speaker, Jeff Nelson, thank you as well. Greatly appreciated. And then I'd also like to thank the audience for attending. It was nice to see a bunch of people online this week, or today rather. And then one last shout out, I'd like to thank the think tank team, our leadership portion of the team, Robin Randall and Ted Haug, and then the team itself, Sepida Asadi, Nicholas Woodard, Adam Quigley, and Ross Jackson, and then our support group, Douglas O'Gearick, Jody Boyce, and Ann Tranter. And then also our CEO, Patrick Brosnan. And then shout out to Justin Banda, our think tank coordinator, who's been doing a great job putting all of this together and contacting everybody and making sure everybody's turning in slides and all that fun stuff. So thank you, Justin. And with that, everybody have a great weekend.